How does a technology company survive 4 decades in an industry built to make yesterday's leaders irrelevant? Since the 1980s, Microsoft has lived through almost every major shift in modern computing. The personal computer created its first empire. The internet changed how software was distributed. Mobile devices moved power away from the desktop. Cloud computing replaced local infrastructure with remote platforms. Artificial intelligence is now changing how people create search code and make decisions. Each transition produced new winners. It also weakened companies that once appeared untouchable. Yet Microsoft remained. That does not mean Microsoft dominated every era. It did not lead the consumer internet. Google became the gateway to online information. It did not define the smartphone. Apple and Google built the mobile ecosystems that shaped an entire generation of computing. Microsoft entered both markets, invested heavily, and still failed to secure the position it once held on personal computers. By the conventional logic of the technology industry, those failures should have been fatal. Large companies are often expected to become slower as they grow. Their successful products create powerful incentives to protect existing revenue. Their internal systems become more complex. Their leaders become cautious. Their best employees are rewarded for improving what already works, not for building something that could make the current business less important. Microsoft appeared to face exactly that problem. Windows was not simply another product. It was the center of the company's economics, distribution, developer relationships, and strategic power. Office reinforced that position. Together, they created one of the most profitable software businesses in history. But the market around them kept moving. Software was no longer purchased only as a packaged license. Applications were becoming services. Computing was moving from company-owned servers to remote data centers. Customers expected products to work across multiple devices and operating systems. Developers were building for platforms that Microsoft did not control. A company designed around Windows now had to compete in a world where Windows was no longer the only gateway to computing. And yet, Microsoft did not disappear. It expanded into cloud infrastructure, subscription software, developer platforms, enterprise services, gaming, and artificial intelligence. By the fiscal year 2025, its business was distributed across 3 large operating segments rather than being dependent on a single product franchise. That creates the central puzzle. Did Microsoft survive because it consistently predicted the future better than everyone else? The evidence suggests something more complicated. The company made major mistakes. It arrived late to important markets. It abandoned products after years of investment. It sometimes defended old assumptions for too long. So the real question is not why Microsoft was always right. It is why being wrong did not remove the company from the next technological cycle. To understand that, we have to look beyond individual products. We have to examine how Microsoft repeatedly changed where it invested, how it earned revenue, and which parts of its old advantage it carried into a new market. Because the most important story in Microsoft's history may not be the technologies it created. It may be the way the company kept rebuilding itself before its existing position became impossible to defend. The answer begins with understanding what Microsoft actually was at different points in its history. Most people remember Microsoft as the company behind Windows. That is true, but only for one stage of a much longer evolution. In the 1980s and 1990s, Microsoft became the standard software platform for the personal computer. Windows provided the operating system. Microsoft Office became the default productivity suite for businesses around the world. Together, they created a powerful ecosystem. Hardware manufacturers wanted compatibility with Windows because customers expected it. Software developers built applications for Windows because that was where the users were. Customers stayed because the software they relied on already existed there. The result was a reinforcing cycle that gave Microsoft extraordinary scale. But that position was built around a particular model of computing. Software was installed locally. Licenses were sold up front. Personal computers were the primary gateway to digital work. Success depended on controlling the operating system that connected users, developers, and hardware manufacturers. That model became increasingly fragile as the industry evolved. The rise of the internet reduced the importance of software distributed on physical media. Companies began delivering services online instead of shipping boxed products. Later, smartphones shifted computing away from desktop operating systems. Cloud computing changed where applications ran and how information was stored. Customers gradually preferred subscriptions over one-time software purchases because continuous updates, security improvements, and online collaboration became more valuable than static releases. Every one of these shifts challenged the assumptions that had supported Microsoft's original business. The company did not always respond successfully. Its internet browser eventually lost leadership. Its search engine never displaced Google. Windows Phone failed to establish itself against the ecosystems created by Apple and Google. The acquisition of Nokia's handset business did not reverse that decline and was eventually written down. Looking only at those outcomes, it would have been reasonable to conclude that Microsoft's competitive position was steadily weakening. Yet another part of the company was moving in a different direction. While consumer markets attracted most public attention, Microsoft's enterprise business continued to deepen its relationships with corporations, governments, universities, and software developers. Products such as Windows Server, SQL Server, Active Directory, Visual Studio, and enterprise support services became deeply integrated into the daily operations of organizations around the world. Those relationships created something more durable than the popularity of any single consumer product. Microsoft also served millions of developers whose software powered businesses across nearly every industry. It had decades of experience building tools, maintaining enterprise infrastructure, and supporting large-scale information technology environments. These capabilities were less visible than smartphones or web browsers, but they represented assets that competitors could not easily replicate. This distinction became increasingly important. The company's future no longer depended entirely on convincing consumers to buy another version of Windows. Instead, it possessed a broad collection of technical capabilities, enterprise trust, developer communities, and long-term customer relationships that extended well beyond one operating system. In 2014, shortly after becoming Chief Executive Officer, Satya Nadella described Microsoft as a company focused on productivity and platforms in a mobile-first, cloud-first world. That statement reflected more than a change in marketing language. It acknowledged that Microsoft's future could not be built around protecting Windows as the center of every computing experience. The company now faced a more difficult challenge. It had to decide whether those long-established strengths should remain tied to the business model that created them, or whether they could be reorganized to compete in an entirely different technological landscape. That choice became visible through a series of decisions that, at first glance, seemed to weaken Microsoft's own position. For decades, Windows had been the center of the company's business. The obvious strategy would have been to protect it at all costs. Instead, Microsoft gradually began doing something unexpected. It started bringing its most valuable software to platforms it did not own. Office became available on Apple devices. Microsoft expanded support for Android. The company embraced Linux after years of viewing it primarily as a competitor. Visual Studio Code became one of the world's most widely used development tools, supporting multiple programming languages and operating systems. Microsoft acquired GitHub in 2018, strengthening its relationship with developers regardless of which platform they preferred. These decisions appeared contradictory if Windows remained the ultimate objective. But another transformation was happening at the same time. Microsoft was fundamentally changing how it earned money. For most of its history, Office had been sold as a perpetual software license. Customers paid once and upgraded every few years. That model generated significant revenue, but it also depended on convincing users to purchase each new version. Microsoft replaced that logic with Microsoft 365. Instead of selling software once, the company offered an ongoing subscription that included continuous updates, cloud storage, collaboration tools, security features, and artificial intelligence capabilities as they became available. Revenue became recurring rather than episodic. Customer relationships became continuous rather than transactional. The same shift appeared across the business. Azure was not introduced as another software product. It represented a different role for Microsoft within enterprise technology. Rather than selling software that customers installed on their own servers, Microsoft increasingly provided the computing infrastructure itself. Processing power, storage, databases, artificial intelligence services, cybersecurity analytics, and developer tools could now be delivered directly through Microsoft's global cloud network. The company was no longer limited to selling software that ran on someone else's infrastructure. It was becoming the infrastructure. This transformation required enormous investment long before cloud computing became the dominant model for enterprise information technology. Microsoft committed tens of billions of dollars to building data centers, networking capacity, specialized hardware, and global cloud operations. Those investments reduced short-term financial flexibility, but they positioned Azure to become one of the world's largest cloud platforms. The financial results illustrate how profound this shift became. By the fiscal year 2025, Microsoft's Productivity and Business Processes segment generated more than $120 billion in annual revenue. Intelligent Cloud contributed more than $106 billion. Azure and other cloud services continued growing at more than 30% year-over-year. Windows and personal computing remained important, but they were no longer carrying the company on their own. The transformation extended beyond products and revenue models. Microsoft also expanded the number of strategic assets it could build upon. LinkedIn strengthened its position in professional networks and business data. GitHub connected Microsoft with millions of software developers. Its gaming business continued expanding through Xbox Game Pass and major acquisitions. Meanwhile, investments in OpenAI and the integration of Copilot across Microsoft products demonstrated that the company intended to embed artificial intelligence into an ecosystem that already served businesses, developers, and knowledge workers around the world. Taken individually, each decision could be explained as a response to a specific market trend. Viewed together, they reveal something more significant. Microsoft was no longer trying to recreate another Windows. It was systematically redistributing capital, talent, technology, and customer relationships into businesses that could remain relevant even if the center of the technology industry shifted once again. At this point, the common explanation begins to fall apart. The usual story is that Microsoft remained successful because it eventually made the right bets on cloud computing and artificial intelligence. That is only partially true. Many companies recognized the importance of those technologies. Some entered those markets early. Others developed excellent products. Predicting the next trend by itself has never been enough to guarantee long-term leadership. The more revealing question is why Microsoft repeatedly had the ability to reposition itself after major shifts had already begun. The answer is not found in a single product. It is found in the way the company organized its resources. Large organizations are often described as slow because they have more employees, more products, and more bureaucracy. But size alone does not prevent adaptation. What prevents adaptation is becoming dependent on one source of revenue, one distribution channel, or one business model that cannot be disrupted without damaging the entire company. Microsoft gradually reduced that dependency. Instead of defining itself by Windows, it increasingly defined itself through a collection of capabilities that could survive regardless of which computing platform became dominant. Its relationships with enterprise customers remained valuable whether those customers used Windows, Linux, or multiple operating systems. Its developer ecosystem remained relevant whether applications were built for personal computers, cloud services, or mobile devices. Its productivity software became useful across Apple devices, Android devices, web browsers, and enterprise environments instead of relying exclusively on Windows. Azure benefited from decades of experience supporting enterprise infrastructure while extending those relationships into cloud computing. Each technological transition therefore became less about replacing the previous business and more about transferring existing strengths into a different economic model. That explains why Microsoft's acquisitions also followed a consistent pattern. GitHub was not simply a software platform. It strengthened Microsoft's connection with developers who would build the next generation of applications. LinkedIn was not merely a social network. It expanded Microsoft's presence inside professional workflows and enterprise data. Artificial intelligence was not introduced as a separate business disconnected from everything else. Copilot was integrated into Microsoft 365 GitHub Azure Dynamics Windows, and enterprise security products that customers were already using. The company repeatedly expanded through assets that reinforced one another instead of creating isolated businesses. Its financial structure reinforced the same pattern. Recurring subscription revenue reduced dependence on major software release cycles. Cloud services generated continuous demand rather than irregular license purchases. Strong cash flow from established businesses financed large investments in data centers, artificial intelligence infrastructure research, and acquisitions years before those investments produced their full commercial return. Scale, in this context, became a source of flexibility rather than rigidity. A larger organization could absorb temporary failures because its competitive position no longer depended on winning every individual market. Windows Phone failed. The broader enterprise ecosystem remained intact. Internet Explorer lost leadership. The company's developer tools, enterprise software, and cloud business continued expanding. Consumer search never overtook Google. Azure still became one of the world's largest cloud platforms. Seen this way, Microsoft's history looks very different. Its long-term advantage was never that it consistently chose the correct technology before everyone else. Its advantage was building an organization capable of moving capital, engineering talent, customer relationships, and business models from one technological era into the next without having to rebuild the company from the beginning each time. That distinction changes how we interpret nearly every milestone in Microsoft's modern history. The company's greatest strength was not avoiding disruption. It was creating a system that could continue evolving even after disruption had already begun. Viewed across 4 decades, Microsoft's history is not a story about preserving the same business. It is a story about repeatedly deciding which parts of that business deserved to survive. The personal computer era established Microsoft's position through Windows and Office. The Internet reduced the importance of packaged software. Mobile computing weakened the operating system's role as the center of digital life. Cloud computing shifted value from software licenses to computing infrastructure and recurring services. Artificial intelligence is now changing how software itself is created and used. Each transition threatened the economic logic that had powered Microsoft's previous success. Instead of defending every existing advantage, Microsoft gradually separated its enduring capabilities from the products that originally expressed them. Its relationships with enterprise customers remained valuable. Its developer ecosystem remained valuable. Its expertise in productivity software remained valuable. Its global technical infrastructure remained valuable. What changed was the way those capabilities were combined and monetized. That explains why Windows no longer has to carry the entire company. Office no longer depends on Windows to reach users. Azure does not require customers to build their businesses around Microsoft's operating system. GitHub serves developers regardless of platform. Copilot extends across productivity software, developer tools, cloud services, enterprise applications, and security products instead of existing as an isolated artificial intelligence offering. Each new technological cycle builds upon assets accumulated during previous ones rather than replacing them completely. The financial results reflect the same transformation. By the fiscal year 2025, Microsoft had become a business in which cloud infrastructure, enterprise software, recurring subscriptions, and artificial intelligence represented major engines of growth. Azure alone generated more than $75 billion in annual revenue, while Microsoft continued investing aggressively in artificial intelligence infrastructure across its global cloud platform. Those numbers are important, but they are not the real conclusion. The deeper pattern is that Microsoft's competitive position no longer depends on extending the life of one successful product. It depends on preserving the organization's ability to redirect capital, engineering talent, customer relationships, and technological expertise before external pressure makes that transition unavoidable. That is why Microsoft's history challenges one of the most common assumptions in business. Large companies do not inevitably lose the ability to innovate because they become too large. They lose that ability when their success becomes inseparable from one product, one source of revenue, or one way of creating value. Microsoft spent decades reducing exactly that kind of dependence. The company did not survive every technological revolution because it always predicted the future more accurately than everyone else. It survived because it repeatedly changed its own economic foundations while its existing businesses were still strong enough to finance the next transition. That difference is easy to overlook because it unfolds gradually rather than through a single dramatic breakthrough. Looking back, Windows, Office, Azure, Microsoft 365, GitHub, LinkedIn, and Copilot can appear to be separate chapters in one corporate history. In reality, they are successive expressions of the same organizational capability. The most durable competitive advantage Microsoft built was never a particular product. It was the capacity to reinvent what the company was before the market forced it to become something else. And perhaps that is why Microsoft has remained relevant through every major technological shift since the 1980s. Not because it protected its past better than its competitors, but because it repeatedly used the strengths of one era to build its place in the next.